The red emergency lights flickered through the curved hallways of Mercy's Reach, casting eerie shadows across the polished surfaces of the Interstellar Medical Station. Dr. Elena Chase hurried through the corridor, her white coat billowing behind her as the station's alert system blared in 17 different languages. Attention all medical personnel. Class 7 trauma incoming. Protocol 912 Delta is now in effect. Repeat. Class 7 trauma incoming. Elena's steps faltered momentarily as the significance of the announcement registered. Class 7. Apex Predator. A human, like her. And Protocol 912 Delta meant comfort care only. No life-saving measures permitted. The intercom switched to a different voice. This one, speaking in the crystalline tones of the Vithron. All non-essential personnel must vacate Emergency Bay 3. Security measures for Class 7 interaction are now active. Mercy's Reach floated in the darkness of deep space, positioned at the nexus of 7 major interstellar routes, a neutral medical facility serving all species across the galaxy. At least, that was the official mission statement. The reality was far more complicated, especially for Class 7 species like humans. Elena reached the staff preparation area outside Emergency Bay 3, where several other medical professionals were already gathered. Dr. Vrax, the chief surgeon, and a crystalline Vithron, was briefing the team. The patient is Colonel Tiran Jax, a Terran mercenary leader, Vrax announced, his faceted body reflecting the emergency lights in fractured patterns. He has been exposed to a Valran toxin with targeted mitochondrial suppression. His transport will dock in 7 minutes. What's the treatment protocol? Elena asked. Although she already knew the answer, she needed to hear it said aloud. Vrax's crystalline form shifted slightly, a sign of mild irritation among his species. Protocol 912 Delta. Dr. Chase, you are aware of the station regulations regarding Class 7 species. Comfort care only. Pain management and sedation until termination of life functions. Elena felt her face flush with anger. So we're just going to let him die? The toxin targets Terran mitochondria. We have treatments for that. The Intergalactic Medical Alliance has determined that resource allocation for Class 7 species is not justified given their inherent danger rating, Vrax replied, his voice devoid of emotion. You are assigned to administer pain management only. Is that understood? Elena clenched her jaw. Understood. As the team dispersed to prepare, Elena found herself alone with Pip, a small Quillan nurse whose bioluminescent patches were flickering with anxiety. A soft yellow that indicated distress. You're upset, Pip observed, her delicate tentacle-like fingers arranging medication vials on a tray. I can see it in your face. Of course I'm upset, Elena said quietly. We're going to let a man die because of his species classification. Pip's luminescence flickered briefly to blue. Curiosity. But Terrans are dangerous. Class 7 designation isn't arbitrary. Elena sighed. The class system was implemented by the Vithron Alliance after the border conflicts. It's political, not medical. First, do no harm. That's what I believe in. Before Pip could respond, the emergency bay doors slid open, and the medical transport arrived. 4 security officers, bulky Krillians with reinforced exoskeletons, flanked the stretcher as it hovered into the room. Colonel Tiran Jax lay unconscious, his broad frame dwarfing the standard-sized stretcher. His skin had taken on a grayish pallor, and the diagnostic readouts above him flashed critical warnings. The toxin was already shutting down his cellular functions. Elena approached, scanner in hand, and began her assessment. The Krillian guards tensed visibly, their clawed hands hovering near their stun batons. He's in multi-system failure, Elena announced, studying the readings. The Valran toxin is targeting his mitochondria specifically. It's a designer weapon, meant to kill humans exclusively. Vrax floated closer. Administer 50 units of Somnex for pain management. Record vital signs for the medical database. No other interventions are authorized. Elena hesitated, her medical scanner still hovering over Tiran's chest. Chief Surgeon, this toxin pattern shows intentional engineering. This wasn't an accident. It's targeted biowarfare. That is not relevant to our treatment protocol. Vrax responded coldly. Proceed as instructed. Dr. Chase. Elena administered the Somnex as ordered, but her mind was racing. As the team dispersed, leaving only a single Krillian guard at the door, she began searching through the station's medical database, looking for records of similar cases. What she found chilled her to the bone. 17 Terran officers had been brought to Mercy's Reach in the past 3 months, all with similar toxin profiles. All had been placed under Protocol 912 Delta. All had died. This wasn't coincidental. It was systematic elimination. Elena closed the database and looked at the dying man. Colonel Tiran Jax's breathing was becoming more labored. According to the monitors, he had perhaps 4 hours before complete system failure. She made her decision. Finding Pip wasn't difficult. The small Quillen was organizing supplies in a nearby storage room. Her bioluminescent patches, now a calm blue. I need your help, Elena said without preamble. I'm going to save Colonel Jax. Pip's patches immediately flared yellow with alarm. That's against Protocol 912 Delta. You'll lose your position, possibly face criminal charges. I don't care, Elena replied firmly. This is genocide disguised as medical protocol, and I won't be part of it. Pip's luminescence flickered rapidly through several colors before settling on a determined green. What do you need? Portable blood processing equipment, Terran-compatible IV lines, antibody synthesis materials. Elena listed. We'll need to set up in the auxiliary lab where the security cameras have blind spots. For the next hour, they worked in silent efficiency, gathering equipment and transferring it to the small laboratory on the station's lower level. Elena used her medical override to temporarily disable the security monitoring in that section, citing a containment procedure drill. Back in the emergency bay, Elena checked on Tiran Jax again. His condition was deteriorating rapidly, and the pain medication was barely keeping him stable. She adjusted his hovering stretcher settings. I need to transfer this patient for advanced monitoring, she informed the Krillian guard. Chief Surgeon Vrax authorized it. The guard hesitated. I received no such instruction. Check your comm panel, Elena said confidently. The authorization should be there. As the guard turned to check, Pip, who had slipped into the room's control booth, sent a false notification to the guard's communication device. The Krillian nodded, satisfied, and allowed Elena to move the stretcher. They reached the auxiliary lab without incident. Elena immediately connected Tiran to the advanced monitoring equipment and began her analysis of the Valran toxin. It's targeting a specific protein sequence in human mitochondria, she explained to Pip, who was nervously watching the door. The toxin binds to the ATP synthase and shuts down energy production at the cellular level. Can you neutralize it? Pip asked, her patches pulsing with worry. Elena nodded grimly. Theoretically, yes. The toxin has specific binding sites that can be blocked with the right antibodies. Terran antibodies. Understanding dawned on Pip's face. You're going to use your own blood. It's the only option, Elena confirmed. My immune system has natural defenses that can be isolated and amplified. If I can extract enough antibodies and introduce them to a system, they might neutralize the toxin before it's too late. She began setting up the blood extraction equipment, attaching the first needle to her own arm. The machine hummed to life, drawing her blood into its processing chamber, where it would isolate the specific antibodies needed. This will take time, Elena said, watching the red liquid flow through the transparent tubes. And Vrax will eventually realize what's happening. Pip's patches had shifted to a deep purple, determination mixed with fear. I'll keep watch. As the hours passed, Elena worked tirelessly, processing her blood and synthesizing the antibody serum. She was growing weaker with each extraction. But the antibody concentration was increasing. Tiran's condition continued to deteriorate, his breathing becoming shallow and irregular. The door to the lab slid open suddenly, and Elena froze, expecting to see Vrax or security. Instead, it was Pip, her patches flashing urgent red. "They're looking for you," she warned. "Vrax has ordered a full security sweep of the station. They'll find us soon." Elena nodded, her face pale from blood loss. "The serum is almost ready. We need 10 more minutes." The final stage of processing completed with a soft chime from the machine. Elena disconnected the vial containing the concentrated antibody serum and approached Tiran's bedside. "This should neutralize the toxin," she explained to Pip as she prepared the injection. "But his system is so weakened, he might not survive the transition." Just as she was about to administer the serum, the lab door slid open again. This time, it was Vrax, flanked by 4 Krillian security officers. "Dr. Chase." The crystalline surgeon's voice was cold and sharp. "You are in violation of Protocol 912 Delta and station regulations. Step away from the Class 7 patient immediately." Elena didn't move, the syringe still in her hand. "This man was deliberately poisoned. Chief Surgeon. The Valran toxin was engineered specifically to target Terrans. This isn't just a medical case, it's part of a systematic elimination of human military personnel." Vrax's crystalline form shifted in what might have been discomfort. "That is not relevant to our medical protocols. The Intergalactic Medical Alliance has determined—" "The Alliance is being manipulated," Elena interrupted. "I've found records of 17 similar cases in the past 3 months. All Terran officers, all exposed to the same toxin, all allowed to die under Protocol 912 Delta. This isn't healthcare, it's genocide by omission." The security officers exchanged uneasy glances, their exoskeletons clicking softly as they shifted position. "Your accusations are serious and unfounded," Vrax replied. "Surrender the treatment materials and step away from the patient. This is your final warning." Elena looked down at Tiran, then at the syringe in her hand. In one swift motion, she injected the serum into his IV line. "Arrest her!" Vrax ordered, his crystalline form flashing with anger. The Krillian officers moved forward, but Pip unexpectedly placed herself between them and Elena. "Wait," the small Quillan said, her patches glowing a fierce red. "The treatment has already been administered. Interrupting it now could cause a catastrophic immune response." The officers hesitated, looking to Vrax for guidance. The chief surgeon seemed momentarily unsure. Elena used the distraction to check Tiran's vitals. The serum was already working its way through his system, and his readings were beginning to stabilize. "It's working," she announced. "His cellular function is beginning to recover." Vrax floated closer, examining the readings himself. "This is unprecedented. The toxin's binding sites are being neutralized." "Because I used human antibodies," Elena explained, still monitoring Tiran's response. "My own blood contains the exact immune response needed to counter the toxin." Before Vrax could respond, the station's communication system activated. "Attention all personnel. This is Ambassador Celeste Marlowe of the Terran Colonial Government. I am arriving with a diplomatic delegation regarding recent medical incidents involving Terran personnel. All senior staff are to report to Docking Bay 1 immediately." The lab fell silent as the implications of the announcement sank in. Vrax's crystalline form seemed to dim slightly. "You contacted the Terran government," he said to Elena. It wasn't a question. "No," Elena replied honestly. "But someone must have noticed the pattern too." The lab door opened once more, and Ambassador Marlowe entered, accompanied by 2 Terran security officers and a legal representative. The ambassador was tall and imposing, her silver-gray hair pulled back in a severe style that accentuated her sharp features. "Chief Surgeon Vrax," she said coldly. I've received disturbing reports about the treatment, or rather, the deliberate non-treatment, of Terran personnel at this facility. Vrax's form shifted in what might have been discomfort. Ambassador, we follow the protocols established by the Intergalactic Medical Alliance. Class 7 species are... I'm well aware of your discriminatory classification system, Marlowe interrupted. What I'm more interested in is why 17 Terran military officers have died at this facility in the past 3 months. All from the same toxin, and all under the same comfort care protocol. She turned her attention to Elena and the patient. And who might you be, Doctor? Elena Chase, Ambassador. I've been treating Colonel Jax against protocol. The Valran toxin was specifically engineered to target human mitochondria. I've administered a serum derived from human antibodies to neutralize it. Ambassador Marlowe nodded approvingly. And it appears to be working. This is a direct violation of station protocols, Vrax protested. The resource allocation for Class 7. Enough, Marlowe cut him off sharply. As of this moment, Protocol 912 Delta is suspended pending a full investigation by the Intergalactic Peace Council. My legal team has already filed charges of systematic discrimination and possible genocide by medical negligence. She gestured to her security team. Secure this patient and prepare him for transfer to our medical ship. Dr. Chase, you will accompany Colonel Jax and continue his treatment. Elena nodded, relieved but exhausted from her own blood loss. Yes, Ambassador. As they prepared to move Tiran, his eyes fluttered open briefly. He looked directly at Elena, confusion and gratitude mingling in his gaze before he slipped back into unconsciousness. The next few days were a blur of medical procedures, diplomatic meetings, and formal investigations. Elena continued to monitor Tiran's recovery aboard the Terran medical ship, while Ambassador Marlowe presented evidence of the systematic targeting of human military personnel to the Intergalactic Peace Council. The investigation revealed that a radical faction within the Valran Confederacy had developed the toxin specifically to eliminate key Terran military leaders, using Mercy's Reach's own protocols as a weapon. The evidence Elena had gathered proved crucial in exposing the plot. 6 months later, Elena stood by a viewport in the newly reorganized Mercy's Reach, watching as ships from various species docked and departed. The station had undergone a complete overhaul of its protocols and leadership. Protocol 912 Delta had been abolished, replaced by the new Intergalactic Medical Covenant, treatment based on medical need rather than species classification. Dr. Chase, a familiar voice called from behind her. Elena turned to see Colonel Tiran Jax approaching. He had fully recovered, his imposing frame now carrying itself with the confident stride of a military leader once again. Colonel, she greeted him with a smile. It's good to see you on your feet. Thanks to you, he replied, coming to stand beside her at the viewport. I've been briefed on what you did, how you risked your position and your own health to save me. Elena shrugged slightly. I did what any doctor should do. First, do no harm. You did more than that, Tiran said seriously. You changed everything. The new medical covenant has already saved hundreds of lives across all species classifications. He handed her a small datapad. The Terran colonial government has appointed me as a peace ambassador to work on further reforms. I'd like you to consider joining my team as a medical advisor. Elena looked at the datapad, then back at the busy station around them. Chief Surgeon Vrax had been removed from his position and was undergoing what the Vithron called philosophical recalibration, essentially, a complete reevaluation of his ethical programming. Many of the old staff had been reassigned or retrained. Pip had remained, now serving as the head nurse for the emergency department. Her bioluminescent patches glowed a calm, confident blue these days. I think I can do more good here, Elena said finally. There's still a lot of work to be done in changing minds and systems. Tiran nodded in understanding. The offer remains open. What you did, Giving your blood to save someone classified as an enemy species. It's become a symbol across the galaxy. People are questioning classifications they've accepted for generations. Elena smiled, thinking of the changes already implemented. The emergency alert system no longer announced species classifications, just medical conditions. Treatment protocols were based on need and effectiveness, not arbitrary danger ratings. One person can change a system, she said quietly. Sometimes, all it takes is refusing to follow an unjust order. As Colonel Jax departed, Elena returned to her duties, now serving as the head of interspecies medicine. The station hummed with activity around her, its diverse staff working together regardless of their biological origins or former classifications. In the emergency bay, a new patient was arriving, a Vithron with crystalline fractures threatening its core systems. Elena hurried to assist, her medical scanner already in hand. "Status?" she asked the transport crew. "Critical but stable," replied the Krillian medic. "The fractures are approaching the central consciousness node." Elena nodded, focusing entirely on the patient's needs. In that moment, there were no classifications, no protocols limiting care, no species designations determining worth. Just a doctor, a patient, and the oath that had given her the courage to change everything. First, do no harm. The blood she had given months ago had saved more than one life. It had transformed an entire system, washing away the discriminatory protocols in favor of a simple truth. All life deserved care, regardless of species or classification. And sometimes, healing required more than medicine. Sometimes, it required the courage to stand against injustice, even when disguised as protocol. As Elena began treatment on the Vithron patient, she caught Pip's eye across the bay. The small Quillen's patches glowed with a new color, a deep, satisfied purple of pride and purpose. They had changed everything, one patient at a time. And they weren't finished yet. When Elena had first arrived at Mercy's Reach 3 years ago, fresh from medical training on Earth, she had been warned about the realities of interspecies medicine. "Leave your Terran ethics at the airlock," her orientation supervisor had told her. "Out here, we follow Alliance protocols, not Hippocratic idealism." She had tried to adapt, to accept the compartmentalized approach to care that the station enforced. Species were classified from Class 1, harmless, to Class 9, destructively aggressive, with humans falling into the upper range at Class 7, apex predator status. It was a designation that carried significant restrictions, particularly in medical resource allocation. For years, she had watched as human patients received limited care, always justified by the clinical language of resource optimization and security protocols. She had filed formal complaints, proposed alternative approaches, even attempted to rally support among the more sympathetic non-human staff, all to no avail. Until Tyran Jax arrived, and she finally understood the true nature of the system she was working within. Now, as head of interspecies medicine, Elena had the authority to implement real change. Her first act had been to establish the Integrated Care Initiative, a pilot program that paired medical professionals from different species to treat patients together, breaking down the silos that had separated care by classification. The results had been remarkable. Not only had patient outcomes improved across all species, but the collaborative approach had begun to erode the deep-seated prejudices that many staff members had carried for years. Pip had become one of her strongest allies in this transformation. The small Quillen, once afraid of humans due to years of cultural conditioning, now led orientation sessions for new staff members on overcoming classification bias in clinical settings. After stabilizing the Vithron patient and transferring them to the crystalline recovery ward, Elena retreated to her office to review the day's cases. Her workspace reflected her approach to medicine, organized but accessible, with reference materials from dozens of different medical traditions sharing shelf space. A soft chime announced a visitor, and the door slid open to reveal Pip, her patches glowing a thoughtful blue-green. "You should rest," the Quillen said, noticing Elena's fatigue. "You've been on duty for 16 hours. Elena smiled wearily. "Just finishing these case reviews. The new treatment protocols for cross-species transplantation are showing promising results." Pip moved closer, her delicate fingers adjusting the lighting to a more comfortable level. "I've been thinking about what happened 6 months ago, with Colonel Jax." "What about it?" Elena asked, setting aside her data tablet. "You broke the rules to save a life," Pip said simply. "I was raised to believe that rules maintained order, that order ensured safety. But you showed me that sometimes rules enforce injustice." Elena nodded slowly. "The hardest lesson I've learned as a doctor is knowing when to follow protocols and when to follow conscience." "The Quillen have a saying," Pip offered, her patches shifting to a philosophical purple. "The path of light is rarely the straightest one." Before Elena could respond, her communication device chimed with an urgent alert. She checked the message and stood quickly. "Emergency in Bay 4, she explained, already moving toward the door. "Multiple casualties from a transport accident near the Nexus Junction." They hurried together through the corridors of Mercy's Reach, the station's emergency systems efficiently directing personnel and resources to the incoming crisis. The atmosphere was focused but calm, a stark contrast to the chaos and confusion that had characterized emergency responses under the old system. When they reached Bay 4, a scene of controlled urgency greeted them. Medical teams were already triaging the injured, who represented at least 5 different species from the transport vessel. "Status report," Elena called to the attending physician, a Nexari, whose respiratory appendages fluttered with concentration. 11 patients, varying degrees of trauma," the Nexari responded, his voice emitting from specialized vocalizers. 3 critical, 4 serious, 4 stable." Elena quickly assessed the situation, noting that one of the critical patients was a Vithron, another a Terran, and the third, a species she didn't immediately recognize, possibly from one of the newer Alliance members. Under the old system, these patients would have been separated by classification, with resources allocated according to their species designation rather than medical need. The Terran would have received minimal intervention regardless of their condition. Now, they were being treated based solely on the severity of their injuries and the medical possibilities for recovery. Elena moved to the Terran patient first, not out of species loyalty, but because the readings indicated the most immediate life threat. A young woman, perhaps in her 20s, with massive internal hemorrhaging from the crash impact. "Multiple organ lacerations," Elena reported as she scanned the patient. "Blood pressure dropping rapidly. We need to stabilize before surgery." She worked methodically, applying advanced regenerative gel to the worst internal tears, while instructing the team to prepare for emergency surgery. The woman's eyes fluttered open briefly, fear and pain evident in her gaze. "You're at Mercy's Reach," Elena told her reassuringly. "We're taking care of you. You're going to be all right." The patient's fear visibly subsided at these words. Simple reassurance that would have been unthinkable under the old classification system, where Terrans were treated with clinical detachment at best and suspicious caution at worst. As Elena continued working, she noticed Pip assisting with the Vithron patient, her small size allowing her to access the delicate crystalline fractures that larger medical staff couldn't reach. The Quillen's patches glowed with focused concentration as she applied specialized bonding agents to the damaged crystal matrices. The next 12 hours were a blur of surgeries, treatments, and stabilization procedures. Elena moved from patient to patient, coordinating with specialists from 6 different species, each bringing unique perspectives and techniques to the complex cases. When the last patient had been stabilized and moved to recovery, Elena finally allowed herself to rest, slumping into a chair in the staff area. Pip joined her. The Quillen's bioluminescence dimmed with fatigue, but still pulsing a satisfied blue. "All 11 will survive," Pip noted quietly. "Under the old protocols. We would have lost at least 3, Elena finished for her, including the Terran woman. They sat in companionable silence for a moment, both contemplating how much had changed in 6 months. The station's communication system activated with a priority message. "Attention all senior medical staff. The Intergalactic Medical Alliance delegation will be arriving tomorrow at 0800 hours to evaluate the implementation of the new medical covenant. Department heads will present outcome data at the central conference facility." Elena sighed. Despite the success of the new approaches, there remained significant resistance within the broader Alliance structure. Many facilities had been slow to adopt the reforms, citing security concerns and resource limitations. Tomorrow's presentation would be crucial in demonstrating that equitable care was not just ethically superior, but medically more effective. "You should sleep before the delegation arrives," Pip suggested, her patches shifting to a concerned lavender. "You've been awake for nearly 30 hours. Elena nodded, too exhausted to argue. As she made her way to her quarters, she passed through the main atrium of Mercy's Reach, where a commemorative installation had recently been unveiled. The simple holographic display showed a double helix, the universal symbol for life across all known sentient species, with a flowing ribbon of light connecting diverse molecular structures. The inscription beneath it read, "In honor of those who stood for the principle that all life deserves care. The first transfusion that changed everything." It was a subtle reference to her actions with Tyran Jax, though her name wasn't mentioned. Elena had refused any personal recognition, insisting that the focus remain on the principle rather than the individual. As she gazed at the installation, a group of medical students, representing at least 8 different species, gathered nearby, listening to their instructor explain the significance of the recent reforms. Elena noticed a young Terran among them, standing confidently alongside peers who, 6 months ago, might have viewed her with suspicion or fear. Progress, Elena thought as she continued to her quarters, slow but undeniable. The next morning, Elena prepared for the Alliance delegation's arrival, reviewing the outcome data one final time. The results were impressive by any standard. Mortality rates had decreased by 23% across all species. Resource utilization had actually improved due to more appropriate initial interventions, and staff satisfaction scores had risen dramatically. As she made her way to the conference facility, she was surprised to see Colonel Tyran Jax waiting near the entrance. He was dressed in formal diplomatic attire rather than his military uniform, the insignia of the peace ambassador prominent on his collar. "Colonel," she greeted him, "I wasn't expecting to see you here." "Ambassador now," he corrected with a slight smile. "And I wouldn't miss this. The delegation includes representatives from 17 systems, including 3 that have been historically resistant to human integration." Elena raised an eyebrow. "You're hoping to sway them with our results?" "I'm hoping you'll sway them," Tyran clarified. "Your data speaks for itself, but they need to hear from the architect of these changes." Before Elena could respond, the station announced the delegation's arrival. They entered the conference facility together, finding an impressive assembly of dignitaries and medical authorities already seated around the large circular table. At the head of the delegation sat a familiar crystalline form, former Chief Surgeon Vrax, now bearing the insignia of the Alliance's Ethics Recalibration Division. His facets seemed somehow softer than Elena remembered, the harsh angles slightly rounded by his experiences. "Dr. Chase," Vrax acknowledged her with a formal tone. "The delegation is eager to hear your presentation on the implementation of the new medical covenant." Elena took her position at the presentation podium, surveying the diverse faces before her. Some appeared openly curious, others skeptically reserved. The stakes were high. This wasn't just about Mercy's Reach anymore, but about how medical care would be delivered across the galaxy. She began simply. 6 months ago, A single case forced us to confront the fundamental flaws in our approach to interspecies medicine. Today, I will show you not just why change was necessary, but why it has proven more effective by every measurable standard. For the next hour, Elena presented the comprehensive data, walking the delegation through the practical implementation of the reforms and the resulting improvements in care. She emphasized not the moral arguments, though they were compelling, but the practical benefits: better outcomes, more efficient resource utilization, and improved staff cohesion. When she finished, the room remained silent for several moments. Then, a Valren delegate, a member of the very species that had developed the toxin used against Tehran, spoke up. "These results are impressive, Dr. Chase, but how do you address the security concerns? Class 7 species like humans were restricted in medical settings for valid reasons of staff protection." Before Elena could answer, Pip stepped forward from her position near the wall. The small Quillen's patches glowed a confident blue as she addressed the delegation. "I am Nurse Pip, head of emergency services. I was raised to fear humans as dangerous predators. Now I work alongside them daily." Her patches shifted to a thoughtful purple. "What I've learned is that classification based on evolutionary history, rather than individual behavior, creates fear where none is justified. Our new security incidents have decreased by 47% under the new system. Not because we're controlling patients more effectively, but because we're treating them with dignity." The Valran seemed taken aback by this response, but nodded slowly in acknowledgement. Another delegate, a Nexari, with elaborately coiled respiratory appendages, raised a different concern. "The resource allocation models suggest that unrestricted care for all species, regardless of classification, will strain medical supplies in crisis situations. How do you prioritize when true shortages occur?" This time, it was Tehran who responded. "The Alliance has operated under the assumption of scarcity for generations, using classification as a convenient method of rationing. But our analysis of supply chains indicates that the shortages were often artificial, political rather than practical." He activated a holographic display showing resource distribution patterns across Alliance space. "By removing the classification barriers, we've actually optimized distribution. Resources now flow where they're medically needed, not where they're politically allocated." The discussion continued for hours, with questions ranging from practical implementation concerns to deeper philosophical implications. Throughout it all, Elena was struck by how many voices now supported the reforms, including species that had historically been among the strongest proponents of the classification system. Near the end of the session, Vrax finally spoke directly to the matter at hand. His crystalline form caught the light as he rose to address the delegation. "As someone who once enforced the classification protocols with absolute conviction, I must acknowledge that I was wrong," he stated, his mechanized voice carrying a new quality, something almost like humility. "The data is unequivocal. The new medical covenant has saved lives across all species designations while improving operational efficiency." He turned to face Elena directly. "Dr. Chase's actions 6 months ago were, by our previous standards, a violation of protocol deserving of severe consequences. By our new understanding, they were the courageous correction our system desperately needed." The delegation voted unanimously to expand the medical covenant to all Alliance facilities, with a phased implementation plan spanning the next 2 years. It was a victory beyond what Elena had dared to hope for when she first defied protocol to save Tiran Jax. As the delegation dispersed, Elena found herself standing alone with Vrax near the viewport, overlooking the docking bays. The former chief surgeon's crystalline structure refracted the starlight in complex patterns. "You were right," he said simply. "I could not see beyond the parameters of my programming. The classification system provided certainty, structure." "And now?" Elena asked. "Now I understand that certainty can be the enemy of truth," Vrax replied. My species values order above all else. It has taken considerable recalibration to accept that the most ordered system is not necessarily the most just or effective one. He shifted slightly, his crystals realigning. I have been assigned to oversee the implementation of the medical covenant across 17 facilities in the outer reaches. I would value your input on the transition protocols. Elena smiled, recognizing the significant evolution this request represented. I'd be happy to assist, Vrax. As the former chief surgeon departed, Tyron approached, his expression thoughtful. Quite a transformation, he commented, watching Vrax's crystalline form move away. I never expected to see a Vithron admit error. People can change, Elena replied. Even crystalline ones. Tyron turned to her. Which reminds me, I have news you should hear. The investigation into the Valran toxin has led to the dissolution of the radical faction responsible. Their leadership has been charged with crimes against sentient beings. That's good news, Elena acknowledged. Though I suspect they're not the only group targeting humans. No, Tyran agreed soberly. But the exposure of their methods has had an unexpected effect. Many formerly hostile species are reconsidering their approach to human integration. He handed her a data crystal. This contains testimony from representatives of 12 species who were formerly classified as incompatible with human interaction. They're requesting medical exchange programs, starting with Mercy's Reach. Elena accepted the crystal, understanding its significance. From fear to curiosity, it's a start. It's more than that, Tyran said earnestly. What you did, it wasn't just about saving one life or changing one protocol. You've initiated a fundamental shift in how different species perceive each other. As they walked together through the corridors of Mercy's Reach, Elena observed the diverse staff and patients interacting with a naturalness that would have been unthinkable 6 months ago. Quillan nurses consulted with Terran doctors. Vithron technicians collaborated with Nexari specialists. Krillian security officers conversed casually with patients from formerly dangerous classifications. The station's communication system activated with a routine announcement. Incoming medical transport, Bay 2, multiple species, standard protocols. Standard protocols. No mention of classifications. No differential care based on evolutionary history, rather than medical need. Just patients requiring care. Elena smiled to herself. The change was real, and it was growing, spreading outward from this single point in space, where she had once defied an unjust order and given her blood to save an enemy species. In the emergency bay, a new shift was beginning. Elena watched as a young Terran doctor was paired with a Valran nurse, the very species that had developed the toxin that nearly killed Tyran. They worked together seamlessly, their focus entirely on the patient before them, rather than on their historical differences. First, do no harm, Elena murmured to herself, remembering the oath that had given her the courage to stand against Protocol 912 Delta. What was that? Tyran asked. Nothing, Elena replied with a smile. Just remembering where all this began. As they continued their tour of the facility, Elena's communication device chimed with an incoming message. It was from Pip, informing her that the first group of exchange students from the formerly restricted species would be arriving the following week. The message concluded with a personal note. Your blood changed one life, then the station, now the Alliance. What's next? The galaxy. Rest sometimes. Elena. Pip. Elena chuckled at her friend's concern, but the question lingered in her mind. What was next? The reforms at Mercy's Reach had proven that change was possible, that ingrained prejudices could be overcome when confronted with both ethical clarity and practical results. But there remained vast regions of space where the old classifications still dictated care, where species designations still determined worth. You're thinking about expansion already, aren't you? Tyran observed, reading her expression. The medical covenant is barely approved, and you're already planning the next frontier. Elena shrugged slightly. Old habits. There's always another patient, another challenge. And that, Tiran said with conviction, is precisely why humans are both feared and needed. You never stop pushing boundaries. As they reached the main atrium, Elena's attention was drawn to a group of new arrivals, medical professionals from across the Alliance, come to observe and learn from Mercy's Reach's transformed approach. Among them were species that had historically avoided human contact entirely, now cautiously engaging with Terran staff members. Small steps, Elena thought, but in the right direction. 6 months ago, she had broken protocol to save one life, never imagining the ripple effects that would follow. Now, standing in the atrium of a transformed Mercy's Reach, watching as the barriers between species slowly dissolved, she understood that some acts of courage changed more than just one life or one system. Sometimes they changed everything, and sometimes that change began with something as simple and profound as sharing your blood with someone you had been ordered to let die. Dr. Chase, a voice called from across the atrium. It was one of the new exchange physicians, a young Valran, looking somewhat disoriented by the station's layout. I was told you could help orient us to the integrated care protocols. Elena smiled. Of course. Let's start with Emergency Bay 1. You'll want to see our approach to multi-species triage in action. As she led the group away, Tiran watched with admiration. The simple act of a doctor refusing to abandon her principles had catalyzed a transformation that diplomatic negotiations had failed to achieve for generations. In the vast expanse of the galaxy, with its countless species and complex histories, change often seemed impossible, the weight of tradition and fear too heavy to move. But Elena had proven that even the most entrenched systems could be transformed when someone was brave enough to give of themselves to save another. One transfusion, one defiant act of healing, one doctor who remembered her oath when others followed protocol. And everything changed.